Bob, I think you're right. I think that music just fires me up.
It is cool.
Welcome to Haman Nature, everybody. And eventually, welcome to the Bob Murphy Show. And my name's Adam Haman. That's Bob Murphy. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Adam.
So I was trying to figure out what we should call this episode. And all I came up with in my brilliant creativity was dumb arguments you see on social media.
Oh, well, I thought it was more specific. I would think we would do something like making mincemeat of midwits or something like that, because I think that was more. Unless you're, anyway. That to me, that's the narrower there. It's not just dumb arguments, but the common thread is people who think they're being sophisticated when it's like no, actually. So it's kind of the bell curve meme.
All you had to do was demonstrate alliteration. You don't even need the rest of that
Right,
whole
right.
explanation. Yeah, we're going to go with your thing.
Okay.
Making mincemeat of midwits. So I figured we'd start with the 150-year-old Social Security recipient, if you don't mind.
Sure. Okay. So on this one, as people know, Doge has been going through various things, and Social Security was, I was going to say on the chopping block, but that might be a bit provocative. And so a thing that was making the rounds, and this happened, I'm seeing if I can get a date here, February 15th. Okay. So at this point, it's probably completely died down, but it did make the rounds, and it just so perfectly illustrates the kind of thing that Adam and I are talking about in this episode. So let's just walk through this. So on February 11th, Donald Trump Jr. tweeted out saying, OMG, 3 exclamation points. It's so bad what's been happening to our country and your money. Breaking, : Musk says there's people over 150 years old collecting Social Security, ... And then he had more, but like the screenshot I'm looking at right now, the person retweeted it, so I don't see what that was. So then there's this person, Toshi, I don't know who that is, then, retweeted Don Jr.'s thing and then said, it looks like Elon's genius coders don't know how COBOL works. And so for folks on the audio, that's COBOL. It's like an old programming language like Fortran and stuff. Social Security runs on COBOL, which does not use a date or time type. So the date is stored as a number using the ISO 8601 standard. The epoch for this is 150 years ago, and then he has in parentheses 1875, aka the meter standard. So if you don't know the date of something, it will be a zero value, which in COBOL will default to 1875, which is 150 years ago. Okay, and so just in case people are getting mixed up there, so what the allegation is here is that, oh my gosh, these idiots, Elon comes in with these 18-year-old whiz kids who don't know anything, they've just grown up in the modern tech world. They don't understand what they're dealing with. And so they're seeing in the database, there's a bunch of entries where the field for the date of birth is blank. And so the way COBOL works is, there's no entry. So it defaults to, a zero value, which, it would pop out as 1875. And since it's 2025 right now, that's where the 150 is coming from, you idiots. So then Justin Wolfers retweeted that and said, you don't need to be a coder to figure this out. Simply type tab age. You'll discover a smattering of 99-year-olds, a few 100-year-olds, a couple of 101-year-olds, and a pileup of 150-year-olds, but no one in their 130s or 140s. That's a clear sign you've discovered a coding issue rather than fraud. Okay, and he had 19,000 hearts, Justin Wolfers did, on that point that he was making. So you can understand what's going on there. So I'll cut to the chase, Adam. I realize that I could go ahead and just do a monologue on this. So make sure everyone gets what they think happened. That if this guy, Toshi, I think it's a guy, if his explanation were correct, then right, what you would see is, as Justin Wolfers was pointing out, that, as the people, as the age distribution got higher, you'd see fewer and fewer people, and then there'd be a bunch of nothing for people ages, 115 to 149, and then all of a sudden there'd be a spike at 150, and Elon Musk is telling Don Jr. going around, oh my God, look at all these fraudulent people collecting Social Security when they're 150 years old, you idiot. And it's like, no, that's obviously a coding error. How do you guys not know that, right? So there's a few problems with this narrative, Adam. I'll just mention the biggest two. Okay, so one problem that I pointed out was Why is it that you? Let me put it this way. What they were showing is if it were just a coding issue and that the database, the field was blank for the date of birth, you're right. It would look like that. But who's to say that if it were actually fraudulent, it wouldn't also look like that? So in particular, if, according to their own hypothesis, people are still getting paid checks with no date of birth entry and the system doesn't know how old they are,
right,
then if I were going to fraudulently set up an account to get checks, I might do that. Right. So there's that element involved that they think they're proving this couldn't be fraud when actually that's not what they're showing, even on their own terms. But there's a bigger problem with that is that it turns out that somebody else chimed in and said, well, no, if you actually go Google that, ISO 86081 standard, the guy's not making that up. That is a thing. But the 0 point starts on I think it's May 20th, 1875. So Adam, you may realize that we're not yet to May 20th, 2025. And so even on their own terms, what you would see is a huge pileup at age 149, not 150.
Right.
And then, so when I saw that made me go look again at Donald Trump Jr.'s tweet. He didn't say, wow, Elon told me there's a bunch of 150-year-olds who are all getting paid. And weirdly enough, no 145-year-olds. He didn't say that. He said, Musk says there's people over 150-year-olds collecting Social Security. And yet, because this Toshi thing with the COBOL was just so perfect for what the left progressives wanted to do, to paint Musk and his whiz kids as a bunch of idiots who are just fumbling around and like, hey, let the adults handle this. We understand Social Security, you dorks. That was so perfect. They transformed Don Jr.'s tweet into... They just began accepting it as if it were a fact that there's this big bucket of people 150 years old. And so I got in the weeds with this and was arguing with people. And I just kept pointing out saying, you guys are just making that up. You don't know that that's true. And then the next shoe to drop was Musk came out blasting out. Don't worry, I'm almost done. Blasting out a table showing the various ages of people in the database going back, to like being 200 years old. Right. And for each age bucket, showing like the buckets in like 5-year gaps or something, or maybe it's 10-year. I can't remember, showing the millions of people for each age. So doing exactly what Wolfers said, if it were fraud, you would see this. And that's actually what it was. Like they had just so convinced themselves that what the actual pattern looked like was, nobody ages, 10 or 115 to 149 and a huge spike at 150 when they just made that up. No one ever said that was the case, and it's not the case. And so you might think, the last thing I'll say here on this, is that, given that just blew up in their face and they look stupid, that they would be a little bit hurt. No. You know what the talking point was with the number thing was to say, you idiot, those numbers don't show people receiving checks. That's just people in the Social Security database, who have a Social Security number assigned, for that number and a date of birth tied to that SSN, and the database doesn't think that they're dead yet. Like that hasn't been separately entered. That's all that means. It doesn't mean they're getting paid. And then on top of that, they said, you idiot MAGA people, if you shut down all these numbers, you know what would happen? There's millions of illegal immigrants who are using these numbers from people who are long dead, and that's actually going to reduce money flowing into the treasury. I hope you're happy, you dorks. As if the MAGA people are supposed to say, oh yeah, you got us there. So everything's cool. Like, I'm not exaggerating. That's literally the progression of the argument on this, and these guys are running victory laps like they're crushing it, and that Don Jr. and Elon Musk are a bunch of dorks. So anyway, I'll calm down and take a breath and let you get a word in on this crossover.
Yeah, a little worried about your blood pressure there, Bob. I have two comments. The first is just how perfectly appropriate it is to imagine Washington, D.C. running something as ostensibly important as Social Security on a programming language from 60 years ago, 70 years ago. That just tracks with my understanding of that organization. But then, as you were talking, it reminded me, these arguments just sound stupid. And I think that's because people aren't using reason to get to them. We're going to talk about a handful of other arguments you're seeing on social media recently. And I think they all have the same characteristic, which is that the truth of the matter in the person's head comes first, which is that Elon is wrong and Trump is stupid and all you MAGA people are idiots. And then the mind just reaches reflexively almost for a rationalization to make sense of the conclusion they've already come to.
Mm-hmm.
It's the Jonathan Haidt thing. We pretend to be rational, but what we really do all the time is rationalize, which is why these arguments just look dumb. And you call them midwits, and it's appropriate.
It may be just in the interest of fairness and also not to mislead people. So I want to be clear. I understand and I agree with Elon as being a bit reckless when he was tweeting out the broader table, because he said something like, I don't know if you saw that exactly, Adam, but it was like he made a joke about, I guess there's a bunch of vampires collecting Social Security checks, right? Because he had a table showing there were even a few people that were like 300 years old or something like that, right, in the system. And so that is at best, it's very misleading, because it was making people think that, what my Doge guys are finding are all these millions of people that ostensibly are 200 years old receiving Social Security benefit checks. And so that's not necessarily what he found, right? And so people were coming forward outraged and saying, no, there's different databases, and there's been Inspector General reports. What's interesting is even here, you idiots, people were coming forward pointing to an Inspector General's report back from 2015, pointing out that, hey, there's millions of people in the Social Security database that are way too, that are clearly dead, and that the system doesn't acknowledge that they're dead. But in that report, and nothing has been done, and they even give recommendations. It's hilarious. And then they'll even say, now the Social Security Administration said they weren't going to follow our recommendations, and here was their pushback. So it's ironic that the people were rolling their eyes at these amateurs coming in. It's like, yeah, we've known for decades that there's millions of numbers of Social Security out there, and they even in the report talk about people were using numbers of deceased people, but the system doesn't know they're deceased, to like open up bank accounts and stuff, right? So that even the very report they're pointing to say, we already knew this, you idiots, is admitting there's tons of bad things happening, and there could be other federal agencies that rely on the master death list from Social Security in order to know, we should stop paying because that guy's dead. So, but strictly speaking, these Inspector General reports were saying, if you just looked at what they were showing, it didn't look like there were a lot of people actually getting benefit checks from Social Security. It was just the one database they used had all that stuff. So I will say that, and then also just, again, in the interest of fairness, people retweeting Musk's thing, others were, like being outraged by it. The people in the comments who were so sure that, there's millions of people getting, that shouldn't be getting Social Security checks, and just piling on. And they were just as smug and arrogant as, the people in Justin Wolfers from the other point of view. Because here, you could just do basic, people were running numbers like, well, if millions of people were getting it, what's the average benefit check? I mean, that would be a lot of money. That wouldn't just be a few million here, or that, what I mean? That would be a ton of money, and presumably somebody would see that. So there is that element.
Yeah, I thought Elon's vampire tweet was flippant as well, because it obviously could have been zombies too, or time travelers, and we haven't even brought up the Benjamin Button situation. How does that work?
Yeah, it was a bit exclusionary.
Exactly. Speaking of Elon, I mean, do you have an opinion about the just blind arguments you see online about how everything that him and Doge is doing is wrong and illegitimate and unconstitutional? Because after all, nobody voted for Elon. I mean, that complaint just seems pretty desperate to me when we're talking about an entire town full of unelected bureaucrats that are, engaged in fraud and waste and abuse, and we're trying to do something about that. But you're upset that that Elon hasn't nobody voted for him. That seems insane.
Yeah, it's I know a guy that works in data security, and I asked him earlier, like when the things were first coming out, and like, they're stealing all your Social Security numbers and stuff like that. And he was just pointing out, like, there's been massive breaches already of that, so there's that element. But also he pointed out, and this, you could kind of twist. I understand the point he's making, and, it is going to sound ironic, but his point was, there's contractors all the time that get security clearance to go in and work on something. He said, after all, that's how Edward Snowden had access to all that stuff. He wasn't, a DOD employee or something. And so now, admittedly, it's a bit weird to try to defend Elon and say, "Oh no, your data's fine. Just remember what happened with Edward Snowden." That wasn't his point, but his point was rather this is standard. They bring in outside contractors to work on stuff, and of course that's going to happen. And it's not like the president is unaware of what Elon's doing. He's having press conferences with him. So it's anyway.
My favorite response to the complaint that, oh my God, this crazy Elon Musk guy is going to have access to all our data came from Elon himself when he tweeted back and said, guys, I did run PayPal. I already have everything. All right. The next argument I have on my list, or what did we call it? Making mincemeat of midwits.
Yes.
I like that. Was it's a little stale now, but back when the Paris Olympics happened and that opening ceremony had that, I don't even know what to call it, insert religious phrase for demonic behavior, but it culminated in that obvious upside down and backwards homage to the Last Supper. And you had a whole bunch of people, ostensibly intelligent, arguing that that's crazy. How could you even think that?
Well, right. And I would even take away the ostensibly intelligent. They are like, that's, to me, that's the theme of this thing and why we're saying they're midwits. That, to be clear for me, a midwit is not an idiot. It's somebody,
yeah.
It's that they're smarter than average, but then because of that, they're elitist and they look down their noses on people and they end up making bad arguments. But, when you try to point it out, it bounces off them because they just assume you don't get it.
Right.
And that's what I mean. Just to, if you feel my pain and my angst, when I was in the Justin Wolfers thing, trying to argue with those people, like saying, well, wouldn't that data, wouldn't that be consistent with, and they were all like so sure that, well, no, you can get paid if you don't have a date. And I was like, okay, so then if everyone knows that, then why wouldn't they just open up a thing and not have a date if you can get paid?
Exactly.
And they just kept repeating the original point about, well, no, if it were a random distribution, this is what it, and I was like, yes, I understand the original point, and I'm telling, you know what I mean? Like they could not conceive of that I understood the argument and found it lacking. They just had to keep repeating it to me like I was 6. So anyway, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, when you see that in person, like face to face, it's visual. You can tell, because you can tell they're not listening to you. They're just waiting for the next thing they're going to scream in your face about how stupid you are. And I'm wondering if is that how it looks online? Are they like in front of their computer, but not even like reading what you wrote? They're just furiously typing.
Yeah.
And
I don't know, but yeah. So it's funny. And that's what made me think of the Olympics episode, Adam, when we were talking about what should we cover for this episode today, because the last time I have been verbally assaulted with such scorn was during the Olympic thing. Cause I was going in, the people that were, you Christian right-wing snowflakes, you think that this has to do, not everything is about you guys. This isn't about the Last Supper. You think everything's about your Jesus guy, and I was going, and I was trolling them a little bit. Like I was saying like, no, there was a guy with a French baguette. I was making fun of French people and stuff. And so anyway, they could not handle what a Neanderthal I was. Like like some of the people anyway. So like I'm saying the in the Justin Wolfers one, cause I was playing it up a little bit there too. Like I was actually zinging them, but I was, sticking my chin out, as it were. And so some of those people, they just couldn't handle how dense I was. And so likewise, it reminded me of that episode. So what happened there, for folks to remember, yes, they had this thing and it was a bunch of, provocatively dressed guys flashing stuff, and women as well, and just doing all this stuff. And clearly they came together and it was a reenactment of the Last Supper. That's clearly what it was. Okay. And so people were outraged. And, this is a thing where it's the Olympics. There's little kids watching around the world and whatever. This wasn't some, avant-garde production in the red light district or something after hours that some conservatives marched in and tried to shut down. This was on, globally televised. So anyway, in the backlash, so I guess the director, I don't know if that's the right term, but the person, the creative director who was in charge of that, came out and clarified and said, oh, no, this wasn't about the Last Supper. I don't mean to offend anyone. What this was, and he referred to some other piece of art that it was, a painting that it was a reference to. Okay, so there was a few problems with that. So number one is the thing he was referring to was itself a derivative of the Last Supper, right? So there's, there's that element. And, it'd be like if somebody, I don't know, did a parody of The Broken Window, and someone said, "I can't believe you would be so rude to Henry Hazlitt," and they went, "Oh no, this wasn't a reference to Hazlitt," or no, I got the backwards. It was the other way around. It wasn't a reference to Bastiat; it was a reference to Hazlitt.
Exactly.
I said it backwards. Okay, but you get the point.
Yeah.
So there's that element, but beyond that, the star of the person that was in the center, that was Jesus, on her Instagram, I don't remember the exact words, but she thought she was mocking the Last Supper, right? Like she's, I forget what she said, something like, the last LGBTQ Jesus or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was, but she was being definitely cheeky, and she for sure thought that what she was doing as the star on the centerpiece of this demonstration was that we are doing the Last Supper. So that's what she thought. So if it was, if that was news to her, that if the director, the art director had to say, no, actually what you're, and then also a PR person from the Olympics, when the controversy first aired, was trotted out, and he said, "Oh no, there's plenty of allusions to the last, like The Simpsons referred to," and he listed a bunch of pop culture things that referred to the painting, and said, were the conservatives marching up in arms when Homer Simpson defiled it or whatever, you know what I mean? So the person from the Olympics thought it was, the star of the thing thought it was, and then even the official story from the guy after the outrage occurred, you know what I mean? So he had a vested interest in lying after he realized, oh wow, there's a lot of blowback on this. At best it was a derivative of the thing that everyone thought it was a reference to. So anyway, but again, I just cannot stress enough for people who weren't in the thick of it, how much contempt the, avant-garde, cosmopolitan, sophisticated elites were like, "You think this was a reference to the Last Supper painting? Oh my gosh, you Philistine. Why don't you go read a book? This was clearly," and I don't believe any of them. Like they were saying, "Why don't you go take an art history class?" I have, at least, via someone that I was living with, like seen an art history class. They didn't cover that. So even on their own terms, I could call their bluff and say, yes, I have seen what happens in an art history class, and they didn't cover this painting. This is not a famous painting, the one that they said it was based on. Right. Whereas the Last Supper, that's a famous painting.
Yeah, a couple things on that. I mean, in the uproar right after the Olympics, or right after the opening ceremonies, you had plenty of evidence pop out from the people who were doing that show, planning it during the time when they were planning it, where they're saying directly, yes, this is an homage to the Last Supper. But more importantly, and to the point of how people's psychology works, these midwits that we are making mincemeat of, notice that the same people will argue with you that you're crazy and you're hypersensitive. It's not an allusion to the Last Supper. It's not an allusion to the Last Supper. It's not an allusion to the Last Supper. And then the second that you demonstrate that it clearly is, they immediately switch to, yeah, but what's wrong with that? Why are you so upset that it's an allusion to the Last Supper? I mean, they won't even take a breath in between those two sentences, which means, Jonathan Haidt is right. The reason isn't the thing. They didn't reason their way to their conclusion. The conclusion came first, that you can just go to hell and you're stupid for being upset with this show. And I'll find a reason eventually that stands up.
Yeah. And I agree. Yeah. Perfect. And that's really too, because it's fresher in my mind with the Justin Wolfers thing, that Justin Wolfers himself, a day after all this other stuff went down, and it clearly became obvious. In other words, when Elon tweeted out the table showing all the different age buckets going back, well past someone being 150 years old, which was consistent with what Don Jr. originally said. Remember, Don Jr. said, Elon told me there are people over 150. He didn't say Elon told me there's a boatload of people who are exactly 150. So after that part died out, and then it switched to the new one. Again, Justin Wolfers was among those saying these idiots, don't they understand that, no, this is a table. This isn't who's getting paid. This is just saying they're in that database. And anyway, we have experts who know this stuff, and why don't you call on these people? And I even asked him, I was like, so the other stuff you said the other day about, the COBOL coding issue, that you admit that's irrelevant, right? And nobody, Justin Wolfers did not chime in on that. I had a few of my fans come in and, say crickets and stuff like that. But in other words, so clearly what's happening there is Justin Wolfers is trying to defend Social Security from these right-wing monsters who are coming in and they just want to slash and burn because they hate poor people. And you're right, just throw any argument. Oh, there's a thing about COBOL that shows people. Let's throw that. Oh, that turns out that's not correct. Well, I don't really know much about COBOL anyway, but the important thing is Elon is wrong and we got to stop
That's
him.
right. That's right.
So it's kind of like throw tear gas, throw this, you're shooting at the monster and,
I don't.
you grab some other weapon. It's not that, oh,
Exactly.
wow,
Yeah.
I really thought that bullet, was going to work. Jeez.
I don't know if this is where the phrase comes from, but when I watch people behave this way, I think of painting yourself into a corner. They try one argument and that doesn't work, so they move and they try another one, and by the end of it, they're sitting in a corner so far removed from any defensible understanding of reality that they just look, I don't know, they look insane to me or possessed. All right, the next argument on my list is, are we burdening our grandchildren with federal debt? What do you have to say on that?
All right, so this is even more, what's the next, I don't know, quintile up from the midwit? Like, this is like people are even smarter. So I've said this in the other venue. I'll try to keep this really brief. So Paul Krugman and Dean Baker came out a while ago. Like, this was during like the Obama, the quantitative easing years. And they made the argument that these conservative Tea Party, partisans or all these people, these deficit hawks, like, their argument is, among other things, the reason the federal debt is bad is that we're like running up the credit card bill and then passing it on to our grandkids. And they're the ones that are going to have to pay for our profligacy. So it's not just that these are wrong spending decisions or whatever, but that it's irresponsible in some sense, that we're living at the expense of our grandkids. And so the argument goes, this is just ignoring basic accounting, because if we run up extra government debt today and then then that gets passed down. Yes, it is true. Other things equal, the higher the federal debt is, the higher that interest payments on the debt will be 100 years from now when our grandkids are, up and running and running the world. But by the same token, who are those interest payments being made to? Whoever happens to hold those treasury securities, who, to a first approximation, are our grandkids. And so, yeah, there might be some distributional issues, but the argument they were making was, it doesn't make our grandkids poorer if we say, let's have, some segment or some subset of our grandkids pay money to another subset of our grandkids. That doesn't make our grandkids poorer and make us richer, right? So that was the argument. And there's a certain logic there. And I confess, I used to believe that myself. That was actually in a version of the lessons for the first version of the lessons for the young economist that I wrote. I had it there. So what I was saying, just so people understand, is I was trying to say, when we worry about how does the federal debt make our descendants poorer, it's because it can crowd out private saving. And so my argument was, it's that our grandkids are born into a world with fewer tractors and factories because we spent it on, goodies now. But it's not that the existence of treasury debt at that time makes them poor. That was my argument. So I actually believed it, but it turns out it's wrong. There's a subtle mechanism where, yes, it is true that if we, here's the fallacy. If we just bequeath the treasury securities to our grandkids and they don't have to pay for it, then yes, the kids being taxed just pay the other grandkids and it's a wash. But what if what happens, which is not unrealistic, is that the way they come to possess those treasury securities is they paid for them. And if you consider that possibility, then you realize the whole awash thing falls away, right? So we're old, and if you sell the treasury security to some kid that's 20 and he pays you for it, you benefit as the old guy, and now he gets, and so then if they tax somebody else to pay him off, it's not just a wash among that generation. They are net down because the first kid didn't just inherit it for free. He had to pay for it. So that's the and you can do it with overlapping generation models and blah, blah, blah. But that was the fundamental mistake that Krugman and Dean Baker were making. So I was saying that, yeah, the average, Tea Party conservative who says, we shouldn't run up the debt because that makes our grandkids poorer, they wouldn't be able to do a neoclassical overlapping generations model and pinpoint the fallacy that like I just did. But nonetheless, they were right, and Krugman and Dean Baker coming in mocking them and how stupid they were. You're thinking of it in terms of a household, but you got to think of it in terms of a nation state and blah, 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 blah. That's a fallacy of competence. They were just wrong. They made some simplifying assumptions and didn't realize how much the result depended on that. And so it's just a great example of how the man on the street and his intuition about, us running up a deficit now and our kids grew up in a world with a huge debt, it seems like that's not fair and that's irresponsible. That is correct. And
Sure.
yet the economists with a little bit of knowledge come in and say, no, that's wrong. And the economists were wrong.
Yeah. I don't know if this is an example of a little bit of knowledge, though, because again, I think they arrived at the conclusion that you dummies, with your spendthrift behavior and don't understand, Keynesian economics, you just think debt is bad because you didn't go to college. I mean, I just think they wanted to justify their policy of running up a bunch of government debt. I mean, I know what you're saying, but
yeah. Oh, yeah. It was motivated reasoning for sure. But I'm
yeah.
saying the bit of knowledge was that realizing, oh, wait a minute, don't just focus on the fact that our grandkids have to pay a higher tax bill just for interest on the debt. You also have to do the accounting flip side that our grandkids collectively are now holding those treasury securities. It's payments from one party to another. So there is a sense at which, how can it make our grandkids poorer if they have to, if our grandkids, have to hand apples over to each other, that doesn't allow us to eat more apples today and then eat fewer apples. That's the intuition. And I'm saying that's actually wrong. If what happens is the kids give some apples to me as I'm an old guy and then I die, and the reason they did that was because they thought, their contemporary was going to give him some apples, then they actually are down apples. So that's the element of it. It's not literally a time machine, but there is a sense in which you can get these weird results that can be, chained across several generations, where there is a sense in which we today could be consuming at the expense of people who aren't born yet.
Yeah, I think I like the fact that the intuitive answer is the correct answer. But then again, I wouldn't listen to you if it turned out the other way, would I? So the last one on my list, I don't even know if we should bother diving into, because it would just be an infinite lake of fire and nonsense. But we sure
That
did
sounds
hear
like
a bunch
hell.
of, yeah, exactly. And we lived through it. It's all those crazy arguments you heard back and forth during the COVID insanity, when people were trying to tell you everything they knew about how vaccines worked and virology and death rates and hospital coding death things. And as I told you before we started recording, I think it's too big to even dive into, but you sure did hear a bunch of crazy arguments online. And I don't know if you heard, but I think Dr. Deborah Birx just came out and admitted a whole bunch of things she said was just nonsense. We were hoping that vaccine would work. We really didn't have any idea.
Well, I heard, the specific one I heard, was it Pierce Morgan? Is that where she was? I think.
I don't remember.
Yeah. So again, I get most of my news folks from Dave Smith and Robbie the Fire Bernstein. They had a clip, where she said, and for folks who don't know who she is, I forget what her exact title was, but she was definitely involved with the COVID regime, under Trump. And it was Trump, right? Not
It was Trump.
Biden.
Yeah, she was there, I think, before even Fauci, or maybe alongside him.
So she's definitely was up there. And so what she said, this isn't going to be literally exact quote, but I'm going to get the spirit of this correct for sure, is she said something like, what we knew, even at the time, is that, that mRNA vaccine was not designed to prevent transmission. The point of it was so that if you caught COVID, it would reduce the harm of it. And so clearly, we should have deployed that for the vulnerable elderly, as opposed to, she said there were kids in hospitals who were getting the vaccine first, as opposed to elderly people in nursing homes. And clearly we should, that was a mistake of priority. And so the smoking gun of it, as to what she said there, was, she said by design, it was not to prevent transmission, but rather. And so as Dave and Robbie pointed out when their post-game analysis of that, well, wait a minute, if it was by design, so it's not like we now know, looking back at the results, that this, in hindsight. No, she was saying by design. So that means when all these people were coming out, including Biden, and saying, go get the shot because then you can't transmit it, you're going to be a wall. She knew that was wrong, and she didn't say anything. And that seems odd. Like maybe she should have spoken up earlier.
Well, I don't know if she was lying. Maybe she just thought that her hope was sort of transformative and would change reality. I think the quote, or part of it, was, I think it was hope that the vaccine would work in that way. preventing transmission. And well, I thought this was, the Dr. Truth Science Administration here.
Yeah.
When are you talking about hope? And yeah, and they were mandating that people take it. Biden tried to make anybody in a big company lose your job if you didn't take it. And then they were prescribing it for, making it part of the vaccine schedule for little kids. It's criminal what they did, and it was based on nothing. But again, to taking us back to arguments by midwits on social media, you sure had a lot of people making a lot of really goofy arguments in support of every goofy thing that Fauci and Birx and company said.
And like you say too, it was a classic where they would make one type of argument, and then when that would clearly fall away, so right, like you would think there would be some humility that people were really going to the wall about no, you're taking the vaccine, not for yourself but for others, and so make sure you can't get that. Yep. Once that was clearly out the window, instead of saying, wow, we got that wrong, that was instead just, well, yeah, we got to take it to mitigate the, the impact or whatever. Look at how many people would have died, but now aren't dying because they got vaccine. You know what I mean? So in isolation, any one of those things would have been an okay move.
Yeah.
But it was just, if it was coming from the same chorus of people who just kept rolling back and changing what the argument was, because it was, but the thing that was always the same, was that, oh yeah, go ahead and take this. And my favorite are people, I don't know if you've seen this, one of my favorite accounts on Twitter, I think it's called Defiant L's, like Defiant Liberal. I think it stands for liberal or maybe leftist. I don't know. But it's showing people who are like tweeting, there's no way I'm going to take Trump's experimental vaccine. Right. And then, hey, if you don't get the shot, then you should go to jail or whatever. You shouldn't be able to work. I mean, it was just, and I'm not even exaggerating, like people that were literally that black and white.
Many famous people said those made those exact pair of tweets. I've seen those pairs over and over and over, and it's just amazing. Well, I don't know, Bob. Do you feel that the midwits have been mincemeated enough, or do you have anything else that you want to roll out? And I love that moving the goalpost thing. It's just so goofy. Mm-hmm. They move the goalpost. Pretty soon you're on a baseball field. And we're like, what are we even talking about anymore? I know you think I'm wrong and the devil and stupid and I don't know science, but you've really changed your argument over the course of this thing.
Yeah, what I've seen too, like on some of these, it was even within like literally the same tweet thread. People I'm arguing with, and then like once Elon dropped the thing with the table, and I would post that, or let me see if I can reproduce it. Okay. So it was in the Justin Wolfers one, and somebody, this guy Garrett Jones, came in to argue with me, and so I had said, like, why are you saying that, Justin? That if there were fraud, you would expect to see, people aged 130 and 135. Because if I were going to make up a fraudulent Social Security number, I think I would pick a number that didn't have me be 130. Right, just like if I were going to make a fake ID, I wouldn't say February 31st, 2002 or something, so I can go drink. You know what I mean? Like that would kind of be a red flag. I'd pick something plausible. And so then this guy Garrett Jones came in, and he was arguing with me about, well, no, you'd see it because the spontaneous. He was trying to make it sound like you as a libertarian economist should know this, Bob. And anyway, so I was fighting with that, and then he kind of just matter of factly said, you wouldn't see, the bucket with thousands of people, or maybe even said millions. No, I think he said thousands of people aged 150. And so then I said to him, okay, but just to be clear, where you're getting that from is Don Jr.'s tweet that said Musk says there are people over 150 getting paid, right? In other words, at this point, I had realized they were just making that up. It wasn't that anybody said there was this big bucket of 150-year-olds. And so, he kind of dropped out. And then when Elon posted the table showing that, I posted that to say, oh, and by the way, folks, and I posted the table. And so there's other guy that was arguing with me who was saying, that Elon and Don Jr. said there was a bunch of people that were 150 years old, then pointed at that table and said, yeah, see? He said there were, you said, where did he say thousands? Here he's saying millions that are 150. So I don't know if I've reconstructed, but if you get in the context of when they were saying, no, there is this big spike at 150 and nothing before, I was saying, where are you guys getting that? And they said, oh, he said it. And then when I posted the table where he had millions of people for each age bucket, they pointed at that and said, see, Bob, that's where Elon said there were people 150 years old. It wasn't just thousands, it was millions, you idiot. And anyway, I don't know if I'm conveying like just the insanity of how they're not realizing that they're changing anyway, I'll stop.
I just want you to be aware, Bob, that you go on X on purpose. You do this for fun, and I just want you to remind yourself of that.
I could stop whenever I want.
Good stuff. Always very fun to talk to you, Dr. Murphy. I'll wrap it up here if you think we're okay.
I think I've had my share of midwits.
All right, no more midwits, as long as neither you nor I are one.
No, we're higher than that.
Or lower.
We're the guy with the cloak on.
I don't really care whether I'm the guy with the bucktooth grin and hasn't showered in a month, or the guy with the Jedi hood on. As long as I'm not in the middle, I'm totally fine. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening or watching to Haman Nature and the Bob Murphy Show. And Bob, thank you very much as always. We will get together soon and do this again. Catch you next time.
Take care, folks.